And we're joined now by author Michael Lewis, whose book, The Undoing Project, has just been released in paperback. And Vanity Fair magazine has just published his latest investigation into how the Trump administration has been staffing government agencies, in this case, the Department of Agriculture. Michael, welcome. Why the Department of Agriculture?
That's a really good question. Isn't it amazing that Vanity Fair let me write 13,000 words on the Department of Agriculture? So there's a conceit here at play. It's a series, and the conceit is that the Obama administration went to great lengths to prepare for the transition. They deputed hundreds of people, spent the better part of a year preparing briefing books, preparing talks, because we have this odd system of government where, you know, on election day, the people who've been elected have to get up to speed very quickly to run the government. I mean, that's what the election's about, right? Who's going to run this government? And the Obama administration expected the Trump administration to be there the next day. Parking spaces set aside, desks, you know, computers with internet connections set up for them and all the rest. Nobody showed. In many of the agencies, nobody showed.
And this is just after Election Day?
Just after Election Day. So the cramming period takes place from Election Day to the inauguration, and where you learn what's going on in these various agencies. And so the briefings, to a large extent, never happened. And so I thought, I'll go get the briefings, figure out what they might not know. I mean, you know, there was a kind of a great course in how our government works waiting to be taken that had no ideological flavor to it at all. It was like how you take a census or how you collect taxes or this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So why the Department of Agriculture? Because I had no idea what it did. I was just curious. You know, I started with the Department of Energy, and when you go into a place like the Department of Agriculture, you were shocked by how important it is. It's like, you think of it as like paying farmers not to grow stuff. That is a trivial part of the budget. A big part of the budget is feeding poor people, feeding people who, that's the most of the money.
So food stamps.
So if you want to look at the social safety net and where it is maybe vulnerable, where holes may be ripped in it, the Department of Agriculture is a very good place to look.
Now, the president, in talking about State Department staffing this week in an interview with Laura Ingraham, said, well, we don't need all those people at the State Department. And there is that view, like, oh, well, they didn't staff it right away, but, you know, what do we need all these people there for?
What do you need people actually running the government for?
What is what goes wrong in the system if there's not the attention?
Let's take an example. And their approach to it, because this is right. I mean, I think his basic attitude is the government really doesn't do anything that's that important, or that I can't just take care of with a flick of my wrist. So inside the Department of Agriculture, there is a roughly $3 billion a year science budget, and and they're dispensing grants to researchers to figure out how we're going to grow crops in a changing climate, mostly. Most of it has to do with climate change right now. I mean, 40 or 50 years from now, we may be able to eat or not eat because of the science that's done now. That job has always been, I mean, the Obama administration, the woman who held it was named Kathy Witecki. She spent 50 years preparing for that job. I mean, she was an agricultural scientist who had studied, you know, the connection between the American diet and American health, who knew the science world, who knew the university researchers who do the work. Into that job, Trump put a man named Sam Clovis, who is basically known as a right-wing radio talk show host from Iowa, who has absolutely no science background at all. Now, what happens? What happens when you do that? Well, he's not himself capable of participating in the conversations you need to have to decide where this money should go. What probably happens is you politicize the science budget. He himself doesn't think climate change is true, so he's not going to be directing money to prepare for climate change. I mean, these jobs, they're powerful, influential jobs, and if they're vacant, what happens is, for a brief time, career civil servants step in and sort of fill the void, but without any direction and kind of trying to guess what the Trump administration might want, but they're already risk-averse government employees. They're even more risk-averse. And there are places in the government, sorry to interrupt.
No.
There are places in the government where we really need them to be taking risks because they're preparing us for the future. I mean, this enterprise is important.
Sam Clovis, of course, withdrew this week because he was implicated in the Russian...
He's still in the Department of Agriculture. He withdrew from that job.
From that job. What did you learn, last question, in this deep dive you did in government? I mean, what surprised you when you did all of these interviews?
Caliber of the people.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing. You know, it sounds simple, right? That it matters a lot why you're in the job, what your motives are. And there are passionate, dedicated, hardworking people who are fighting hunger in America, trying to figure out how we're going to eat 50 years from now, trying to make sure that rural America doesn't just collapse. I mean, the Department of Agriculture is the touch point of government for rural America. And the people who are in those jobs, you know, a lot of them are in there for a reason, because they care about it. And they aren't doing it to make money in the private sector afterwards, kind of thing. So if you have, now there's a spirit of public service that still exists, that's precious, and without it the society collapses. And we ought to treasure that.
All right, Michael Lewis, great piece, thank you. We'll be right back.